Good morning, everybody. Welcome to class this morning. Before we get started talking about what we're going to talk about today, I just wanted to make a few announcements, and one is in regard to the Blackboard announcement that I sent out yesterday. So I said that I'm mostly finished grading. There are one or two things that are kind of still outstanding that I had discussed with some of you about. And that's all good. I've mostly finished, but with that being said, I've kind of basically finished grading the previous module, Module 8. What I decided to do, since a lot of you were having trouble and kind of told me that you were having trouble with the virtual machine interface with the material, what I've done is if there was some sort of issue with what I received where it was less than an A, so anything that was below a 90 on any of the hands-on material, so any of the hands-on activities or skills sort of things, if you received less than a 90 on those, to where it would be less than an A and really wouldn't help out your grade very much, what I did was I exempted that grade. Now what that does not include the watch and learn activities. Those were still graded as normal, so whatever you received on those is what you received for those. And the module exam, the module quiz at the end, whatever you received on that is what you received on that. But with the hands-on activities, if you received less than an A, something that wouldn't really move your grade to a positive direction toward, an A at the end of the semester, I ended up just exempting that grade for you for the previous module. And all things considered, we'll probably do it for this upcoming module about spreadsheets as well. We'll have to see if we have a lot of the same issues regarding the virtual machine interfaces for this module as we did the last module, because it is worth being said that the hands-on activities for this module are going to be very similar to the hands-on activities for the previous module. They do use a similar kind of virtual machine as the Word module did, where it's kind of virtualizing a computer that's using Excel in your browser. You have to complete assignments in that Excel in the browser, and you have to, go through it, do the attempt, click to upload the assignment, and then move on to the next piece before you're finished with that assignment. So it's going to be very similar to what we've done previously. In regard to the hands-on assignments for our spreadsheets module, as it has been for our Word module. So what I'd like for you to do, if you're experiencing the same sorts of issues, is one, I would like you to let me know that you're experiencing these issues. But two, I want you to reach out to the company that I've previously posted the link to their help page. And we've kind of examined that in previous live streams. I'd like for you to kind of reach out to them and just let them know about the issues that you're having and get help directly from them if you're having issues, because they are the ones that can fix these issues. So not only could you be helping yourself, but you could also be helping future people that are taking this course, not only here, but at other colleges around the world, really. Because this is material that's used all over. So if you're having issues, I encourage you to reach out to that company to try to get them fixed, because they're the ones that can fix them. Unless it's something that's Blackboard related, there's nothing that I can do about it, I'm afraid. If it's discussion related, or if it's, something to do with the grade book or something like that, then it's something that I can fix. But if it's one of those assignments, one of the hands-on things, one of the quizzes, then it's, one of the things that was created by the publisher. And I'm afraid that there's nothing that really I can do to fix it. And, as we've kind of talked about earlier in the semester, this is the first time we've used this material. So we are really kind of learning about it, all the little quirks of the material, at the same time you are. And we're kind of struggling with it at the same time you are. And so, if you're having issues, you need to let us know. You need to reach out to the company to see if they can get them fixed, or tell you about a fix that exists for them. That way we can all know about what's going on and kind of all have an understanding of the issues and how to fix the issues. I think, one of the big things that we kind of need to take away from all this is to never be afraid to reach out and ask for help. That's one of the things really in an online environment where we're taking online courses where, like, I can't see you on a week in and week out basis. I can't see you. You can't see me. There's no interaction that we have that's face to face, to where you could come up to me and tell me something, or I could see you kind of struggling with what you're working on, or anything of that nature. So when these sorts of things happen and you're having issues and you're having problems in an online class, especially, you have to be proactive and you have to reach out and you have to let somebody know. Because without doing that, then I really don't have much of a way of knowing. So please, don't be afraid to reach out to me. Don't be afraid to reach out to the company. They're, I've dealt with them before, as, a couple weeks ago after the live stream, as I mentioned in the announcement post live stream. I had a conversation with them to solve some of the issues that I experienced during the live stream, and they gave me the information on that. Very friendly, very quick at solving the issues. No problem at all. You just go to that link that I posted in the announcements. You go down to the lower right-hand corner. There's a little button for starting a live chat, and they can help you with your technical issues that you have with their material. So I encourage you all to take advantage of that. But this week we're starting to talk about spreadsheets. And really a specific type of spreadsheets, Microsoft Excel spreadsheets. But as we've kind of discussed before, since we kind of let the material do the big work for actually teaching you Microsoft Excel, I like to talk about some different topics and some different things. And you might notice that this presentation that I have here for you this week looks a bit different than the other presentations that you're used to seeing week in and week out in our live streams. And it's because I didn't make this presentation. Our publishers didn't make this presentation. This presentation was actually made by one of my professors back in the year 2004 at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So this is a roughly 16-year-old presentation, but the data that is contained inside of this presentation is still a very worthwhile bit of data. I mean, the information doesn't change, right? Like the topics here that is covered is the same now as it was 14 years ago. And I think, one of the interesting things to consider here is that since this was made by one of my professors at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, this is almost like getting a University of North Carolina education for a Cleveland Community College price. So, you can kind of consider that a little bit of value. As we approach these topics. But we're talking about spreadsheets, and we're looking back. The things that we're talking about this week as the first week of our 2-week module, as we examine Excel over the next couple of weeks. This week we're talking about the paper. We're going to be looking at sort of the history of spreadsheets and how we got to where we are now in terms of the digital spreadsheet. But we can see here what we're going to cover over the next 2 weeks, this week and next week. This week we're talking about the history of spreadsheets, and that's going to cover where we started with the idea of the paper worksheet, the problems with the paper worksheet, moving into the electronic spreadsheet, and then on into what the electronic spreadsheet can do for us, and the sort of automation and ability that the electronic spreadsheet gives us via cells, via formulas and functions, and the things that spreadsheets are good for, and cell references. So to really start understanding the idea of the spreadsheet, we got to go back in time a little bit. All the way back to before the personal computer was in everybody's households. All the way back to when the most common way of doing things like inventory management and accounting in business was on paper. On a paper worksheet. So we had these worksheets, and they were used in many different types of businesses: inventory management, accounting, payroll, all these different sorts of things. We had these different types of paper worksheets that were designed for these purposes. And you'd go to the office supply store and you could get either a specific sort of geared book that contained these specific worksheets that were like accounting ledgers or inventory sheets or payroll sheets. Or you could get something that was like more generic, that was just like a grid that you could just kind of fill out yourself. But really, they all had one thing in common, and that was that they used columns to separate different types of information. Called them fields, different fields of information. Now, since we had all these different types of worksheets, based on their use, these column sizes varied. And you had all sorts of different formats available, as we mentioned, based on their purpose. The big thing here is that, what we have to consider here is that it's all printed. It's paper. When you put something onto paper, at that moment, it's finalized. It's kind of unchangeable, if you will. If you have this printed paper worksheet and the column is a specific width, and maybe for your purpose you might need it a little wider or a little narrower, tough. It is what it is because it's printed. When you put information into this worksheet, you write it all down by hand. Or maybe you have the ability to take the pages out and put them into a typewriter and type everything into there, but that might even be more cumbersome. And obviously, a sheet of paper has no ability to do math for you. So who was responsible for doing all the math? That would be you. So at the end of the day, what this paper worksheet meant was that you were doing lots of paperwork, sitting down, writing lots and lots and lots of things, lots and lots of numbers on lots and lots of lines and lots of columns, and doing lots and lots of calculations by hand. Now think about this for just a minute. What if you made a mistake? What if you wrote down a number wrong? What if you did a calculation wrong? What if you put a number in a wrong place? What if you did something wrong and then used that wrong number in another calculation? And then used that wrong number in another calculation. And then all of a sudden your entire paper worksheet is just wrong. And as we've kind of said, once it's on paper, it's on paper. It's going to be very, very difficult to find your mistake, and it's going to be probably even harder to fix your mistake. At that point, it'd probably be easier to throw the whole thing out and start over. Meaning even more paperwork and even more calculations. And this was the way of life. This was the way we did business. Until the mid-1970s. When Dan Bricklin and Bob Frankston got together to create something called VisiCalc. Now, this was primarily the brainchild of Dan Bricklin. Dan Bricklin and Bob Frankston had worked together at a previous job. And Bricklin asked Frankston to work with him on this project because they had worked in a previous programming job at a different organization. But this VisiCalc was born out of necessity. And it's sort of an inspiring story when you really think about it. And we can kind of take this story and apply it to our own lives. Mr. Bricklin was, at the time, a Harvard MBA student. He had previously done computer science, I believe, at MIT. He had had several programming jobs at different organizations, writing word processing programs and point of sale programs, and various other computer programs. So he had a background in computer programming, and he was taking an MBA degree, Master's of Business Administration, at Harvard, one of the most prestigious MBA degrees in the country, of course. And they taught these business classes via what they called the case method. And what essentially that meant was that the instructor would present them with a case study. And based on that, they would have to do all these calculations and projections and kind of figure things out for this case study business. And they would have to do that every day. And then when they would come back into class, the instructor would ask them to present based on their findings, and they would get graded based on their participation and how well or how poorly they were able to come up with a solution. So if you did well and you were able to do all the calculations and everything correct, then you could participate a lot and get a good participation grade. If you did poorly, got a lot of wrong answers, or made some mistakes in your calculations when all of this was done by hand, because this VisiCalc didn't exist yet. They had to do all of this by hand. If you made some mistakes and got your wrong answers where you really couldn't participate, grade goes down. So Mr. Bricklin basically said that he got this vision one day of a chalkboard that was dynamic, that you could write numbers in different places, and when you wrote the numbers in the different places, it would automatically do calculations for you. And if you changed those numbers, it would change the results. And it was this sort of daydream type of vision that was the impetus for the spreadsheet, the digital spreadsheet in VisiCalc. There are several videos out there on YouTube that you could go watch where he discusses where he kind of got some of the ideas from. He talks about how he decided to name the rows and the columns. He says that he initially thought that, maybe he would just allow the user to name the cells in a way that a programmer would. So you'd name them like variables where, if you put a number in a location, then you would name that, and then you would just give that location a name that you wanted to give it. And if you wanted to refer to that location later, then you would just refer to it by that name that you gave it previously. But he quickly found out that that would be super complicated, and especially so for, people who weren't very accustomed to programming. And so he got this idea of putting everything in a grid system with letters denoting the rows, or rather letters denoting the columns, and numbers denoting the rows. So you could have this grid system that kind of worked like a map, if you're old enough to remember maps, where you could find yourself at C7, meet them across, and find that particular location. And this was the first of its kind, and it was really touted as one of the biggest innovations of its kind when it was brought to market. It was brought to market for the Apple II. And Steve Jobs was quoted as saying that if VisiCalc wasn't developed for the Apple II, then they would be talking to somebody else, meaning that if it was designed for another computer system, like if it was designed for a Windows computer, they'd be talking to Bill Gates about the importance of this great, huge innovation. Wherever, it wasn't the computer that made the innovation, it was the innovation that made the platform. And this right here is actually a picture of actually the other guy. This is actually Frankston's workspace. This is where he spent a lot of his time working on the code. And so really a big part of the inspiration of this story comes in the idea of seeing a need and coming up with a solution for that need. We could see here that what we have here is just kind of a messy home attic office. And, you hear the old wives' tales of, the other big tech companies that started in a garage. And really, it doesn't even have to be related to a big tech company. It can just be something that you need that solves one of your problems. And if there's something that you have that's a problem, that's a barrier to doing something that you need to do, whether it's in your personal life or in your career field, and you can come up with a solution to that problem, then working on that solution is something that could be done and something that could be revolutionary. Not only did it change the lives of Bricklin and Frankston, it changed the lives of everyone around the world, because VisiCalc, obviously, being the predecessor to what we know as Microsoft Excel, a common piece of software that's used in business applications every single day all around the world. Neil Graham called the electronic spreadsheet the most brilliant software invention of the microcomputer era. And it really was. It was the biggest, most... if you think back, I think we've probably talked about the idea of knowledge workers before. People, when the personal computer kind of hit the market and we had this ability to take computing away from the centralized location and to put it into the hands of a bunch of individuals, we had the rise of what we call knowledge workers. People that work with information. It's their job to work with information of all different types. And of course, the most common information that we're going to work with are numbers. Right? Doing calculations, doing that sort of inventory and payroll and accounting. There are all sorts of different departments that can utilize a spreadsheet, an electronic spreadsheet, to help make their jobs easier, better, more efficient. The spreadsheet did all of that. Things that were at one time done with paper and a pencil were now done dynamically via the computer. And really, when we look at it, it's simply just a two-dimensional table. As we see here, we just have information along the x-axis and information along the y-axis. But it's what we can do with that information in that two-dimensional table that makes the spreadsheet so powerful. the fact that each entry occupies a cell, and each cell can hold numeric values, being the numbers, or alphanumeric values, being the labels. So across the top we have those labels. Down the sides we have those labels. Those are all alphanumeric values. And then we have the numbers. In our spreadsheet example here, we have these dollar values based on how much of a certain type of musical genre has sold in a given month. But the real power of the spreadsheet is in what you can do with this data. And it's in the formula. Being able to write an equation that references these cells, that's more than just adding something up quickly, that harkens back to that idea of that magical chalkboard that Bricklin kind of conceived in his mind, where if you change a value, then automatically it retabulates everything and gives you a new result. That's the real power of a spreadsheet. And we have the roots of this that go all the way back to Charles Babbage. In the mid to late 1800s. I think we've mentioned Charles Babbage before, the inventor of the difference engine. The difference engine being the first mechanical computer. And really, it was just a glorified calculator. One of the big purposes of being able to do a lot of things with technology over time has all boiled down to kind of just simplifying math for us. Like when we look at a lot of the major advancements in technology, a lot of them just came as a result of the fact of math being difficult. And you could probably agree with that fact. We saw Babbage with the difference engine and the analytical engine, and them basically just being glorified calculators that do math for us and give us results to an equation. Programming essentially is just doing math for us. On into the spreadsheet that's just doing math for us. And to kind of summarize everything, those manual spreadsheets, those paper spreadsheets had a ton of problems. They were time consuming to produce. You either had to write everything down by hand or put them in a typewriter and manually go through and type in every little cell. And if you messed up, you had to start over. They were difficult to edit and update. All the miscalculation errors. Because you had to do the calculations by hand. We're talking about a paper spreadsheet. If you're doing the math here, you're either doing it on paper or you're doing it with a calculator. And so in this instance, the math comes down to you. And if you do the math wrong and you write it down, then you've set in stone essentially the wrong answer. So you have these miscalculation errors, you have these transcription errors, where you've simply written down the wrong number. Maybe you've just taken a couple digits and flipped them. Had a little dysnomia for a couple minutes and just flipped a couple numbers. But when you flip a couple numbers, that's a completely different number. And that's going to have a cascading effect that's going to change everything else that happens going forward. But with electronic spreadsheets, these things are automated. They're fast, they're reliable, they're simple to modify. If you make one of these errors, you go back, you find it, you fix it, and that fix is going to cascade all the way through and fix everything that needs to be fixed automatically. Instead of you having to throw out all of your previous work and start over, or redo a ton of work, just one little fix and everything else is fixed automatically. And another thing is that formatting can easily be changed. Remember when we talked about earlier how, like, you get that printed spreadsheet and that's it. Like, it's printed and you can't change it. If the column's too big, it's too big. If the column's too small, it's too small. If you're writing in it by hand, your handwriting is the font that you're using. And I've seen students' handwritings, and I know a lot of you probably have some really terrible fonts that come out of your handwriting. And if you have really bad handwriting, that could lead to more problems down the line with the difficulty in reading what you've written. But with an electronic spreadsheet, you can change the width of the column. You can change the height of the row. You can change the font that you're using. You can make it look how you want it to look for your purposes. And I'd like to leave you today with this. And it's an actual picture of what VisiCalc looked like. And we can see here that as far as the interface goes, what we have today looks quite different. Microsoft Excel, in terms of interface, looks very different than what we have here with this old picture of VisiCalc. But in terms of how we actually use it, it's really, really similar. I mean, we have a grid, letters across the top, numbers along the side. We can see in column D, we're doing automated calculations of a balance. I mean, here what this user is doing is they're balancing their checkbook, which is not something that something that is a skill that people have utilized a lot anymore. Now that we have online banking, we can just punch up the app and immediately see all of our checks and deposits, all of our outgoing spends, and all of our incoming deposits. So it's not a skill that we have as much anymore. But that's what this user is doing, is they're, in a time before online or mobile banking, they're balancing the checkbook. And we can actually see here in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, we can actually see when this picture is from. January 4th, 1979. So here we are, 41 years ago. And while it looks a lot different, it's not really that much different. It's not really changed all that much over the last 41 years. So I'm going to leave you with this image today as kind of your final thought. Something that you can carry throughout the week. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be hanging out in the chat for just a couple minutes here before I end the stream. So if anybody's here with me live, they can ask me a question in the chat. Otherwise, if you're watching this recorded, or if you are, or if you think of your question later, send me an email. But that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you next time.